Good afternoon. My name is Gregory Saxton. I am CTO at CloudFrame. Thank you for joining today's presentation. Happy to have you here. So why do I think about COBOL modernization, really your overall legacy modernization as a journey? There's no easy button. You're going to discover a lot of problems you didn't expect, possibly new problems if this is the first time you're doing it, or first time you're doing it in a new organization or with a new team. uh, you're going to run into a lot of resistance. You're going to run into resistance trying to build consensus, to find people that will work on it, to essentially change the way that the system operates, behaves, and the different stakeholders that it touches. You're definitely going to run into some setbacks, and you're going to learn a lot. In short, modernization is messy, risky, time consuming, and to be blunt, it's taken a lot of careers down a bad path for people. My goal today is to help you, understand, recognize, and prevent going down those dark, dreaded paths. So we talk about a pilot project. Technical teams talk about proof of concepts. A proof of concept is like a technical feasibility, right? You're making sure that you could put something in your infrastructure. It doesn't cause alarm bells to go off, and you can run some experiments that give you confidence that you're more likely to succeed than fail. And you end up picking the thing, if you're like evaluating a thing from a vendor, that for whatever reason just resonates as better than the other things you looked at. When you think about a pilot, it's much bigger, it's cross-functional. If you zoom back in from an IT perspective, what does that mean? It could be a few online transactions, it could be a whole subsystem, all of your online, all of your batch, one big complicated batch job that is, performance or cycle time sensitive. Could also be the entire system. It just depends on how big something is and how much you have the ability to sort of do this controlled experiment. Sort of strange. I'm seeing this poll popped up on my screen, David. I don't know if everybody else sees that.
Yeah, that's just the poll that we were.
Okay. Thank you. So when you think of the pilot, however, it's really important, at least from our perspective, that you have your stakeholders outside of IT participating. Well, certainly IT is doing, in many ways, the heavy lifting on the technical work for sure. What you're really looking for in a pilot is you're looking for those opportunities to get validation from your stakeholders that there's been no unintended consequences outside of the technology concerns. And potentially, the organization identifies opportunities where you can improve. And we've talked about that earlier. You're going to want to, sort of decouple those improvement opportunities from your overall, first phase of modernization. Otherwise, you're just creating modernization risks. So this sounds like a technical question, right? The $64,000 question for those of you that grew up with that game show in the 70s. But but too often, as I alluded to on the last slide, I see pilots designed around what I call the hopes and dreams of IT. There is this vision of nirvana based on technologies or technology trends, or perhaps being able to change the staffing model. There's something that is very IT specific. And when I talked about some of the helping point out some of the issues that you want to avoid in your pilot projects, particularly things that can have unintended consequences for your career, something I'd like you to think about is that the pilot needs to, air quotes, scratch the itch for every stakeholder involved. Anybody who is affected, interested, sponsoring, funding, there needs to be something in it for them. So I think I went one slide too far. What is a modernization pilot success plan? Don't think about this in terms of of just a project plan or something like that. Yes, that's absolutely important. This is not a webinar about project management 101. What you're really looking at here is not just your overall approach and how you're going to communicate it, how you're going to deliver it, think elevator pitch and a detailed plan, but how you're going to deal with some of the risks that come up, how you're going to peacefully coexist with an existing system as well as the system you're piloting, and how do you solve for all of the care and feeding that this pilot needs, because it's not just about running a bunch of processes on a machine somewhere. There's people who need to be engaged and involved, and the senior stakeholders from these organizations, right? They have their own definition of success. How do they measure success? How do you bring people on this journey? This is really what you're planning for. As I said, so often these are organized around the hopes and dreams of IT. So what makes it good, right? I like to say, from a technology perspective, everyone is trusting you to do your jobs, particularly if you've been trusted with the opportunity to modernize a system, to take a mainframe system off the mainframe and to bring it to that target state architecture, whatever it is that you define good. You're here today, so I'm guessing you consider Java, Spring Boot services, Spring Batch, and a journey towards cloud native to be good, because that's what we consider good. But think about like big picture things that the pilot can demonstrate, right? Okay, a technology refresh is great. Moving off the mainframe certainly gives you the opportunity to migrate your data, put it in the same formats that the rest of the internet uses. UTF-8 ASCII, that opens up opportunities in the cloud to introduce new API integrations, to have your data consumed by machine learning type algorithms, analytics. There's the opportunity for financial pivots to cloud economics. No doubt you're working in companies now that have done some amount of work in the cloud, and often stakeholders, particularly on the side that are writing the checks for these legacy systems, they're also writing checks for systems that have moved to the cloud or brand new cloud systems. And they're kind of scratching their head understanding, why some of these older systems cost so much. Um, is it around, improved time to market or change lead times, right? How long does it take me to get a change on the mainframe delivered? If, for example, I'm the state of New Jersey and I need to support changes with federal unemployment benefits in the middle of a pandemic, does it take me a day, a week, a month, or am I still recruiting people and doing it manually? So these are the things to think about. Something I've run into quite a bit in my career and working with companies, both at CloudFrame and as a consultant in prior roles. When companies think about modernization, they're not just thinking about the technology or their processes for how they deliver IT. They're thinking about culture change. There's a leadership perspective, a sort of mood or belief they have about the people in the operating model and how they feel about their work. And there's this belief about how leadership would like to affect change, so that there's more enthusiasm, there's more of a call to action and urgency around doing things, and a drive towards continual improvement and optimization. Sort of the culture that is just embedded in the world of DevOps. It's exciting, and if you're not familiar with that, I'd encourage you to spend some time on YouTube and learn about it. So the real challenge now, we agree we need people, certainly technical people, to modernize a computer system written, in COBOL or something like it on the mainframe. We need stakeholders outside of IT. We need to think about what are we trying to demonstrate? Is it about taking just a couple transactions, for example, just taking an online transaction that's used by mobile devices and web devices to show balances and holdings of your stock portfolio? Or is it about, some larger part of a system? Or is it really around the approach? Are you trying to prove the ability of your team to be able to work with a tool to modernize a system, and then to be able to do all of the care and feeding around break fix and evolution of that based on some roadmap? Is it about doing those things with and doing it with a systems integrator? Right? Those are some of the big picture things that you think about. But what else, right? From my consulting experience and from my experience just working with our existing customers, the biggest thing that we discover when we go through a pilot exercise is the organization's ability to create and absorb change and all the impediments and change friction that leadership needs to address. And that's a really important point, and it's often overlooked, and it's also something that people don't tend to think about when they think about success criteria. You're changing technology, you're changing operations, you're changing the way people interact and with this system or data today. It just makes sense that there's going to be impediments to change, and they're not going to be isolated to whatever the scope of technology is that you're working on. Um, Other things, that you just need to think about. I talked about this earlier, right? Go back down in the weeds again. You're running a pilot. You have your existing production system. If somebody's manually entering things into a system, for example, they're working in customer service, do you have them swivel chair and update the pilot system too? Do you automate that? Like, how do you actually get data into this pilot system? How do you reconcile it and make sure it's producing the outputs that you want? Hopefully they're identical outputs. And look at it from the other side, the operational side. When do you start training? How do you consider the role evolution of your staff? You have a mainframe staff now. Hopefully they don't all just lose their jobs. They're all your subject matter experts. You're going to need them for a long time, particular if you want to maintain these systems, right? Some of them are probably excellent programmers and could write code in any language given the opportunity. So just things to think about. It's really not just about proving, some technical equation does or does not add up to what you believed it would do, right? The whole reason you're doing this is because there is some belief, some null hypothesis around tangible business benefits, and it's more than just a cost. It's more than just a people element. It's everything. And again, something else that people tend to overlook that leads to one of those dark paths. So
That's a great summary, Greg. I want to pause for a second and just give everybody an update on the poll that we conducted. A vast majority of the respondents chose that business requirements, the business scope, is the most important thing in their pilot projects at their organization, as opposed to technical. And I think you just did a great summation of not going in either direction to either extreme, but to balance a lot of things. I think it was interesting that you brought up operational issues there and considering those when your scope of your pilot, because there is a lot to consider. And hopefully you're going to get into some of the details of what should be included in the success plan.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you,
Great.
David.
Yep.
Business considerations. You can read the list. The things that have really jumped out at me over the years is it's so often just overlooked. There are probably, tens or hundreds of people in companies that are using systems compared with the ones or tens in IT that are maintaining systems. That's why these IT systems exist, is the economy of scale that they're able to provide. Because without them, there'd be hundreds or thousands of people doing things on pieces of paper and file cabinets. And you really need to think about how people will be affected. And if the new system will not behave as the same way the existing system does, you need to think about business process and information impacts. And the more of those that you have, you're not just doing a legacy modernization, you're doing a complete business process change. And that changes the entire sort of the scope, the horizon, the risk profile. Uh, Not so much in the United States, but from my experience working with European companies, as you start to sort of change the processes and systems people do, that sort of opens up the box to redundancies where role descriptions have to be rewritten and people need to reapply for jobs. You could unknowingly open up a Pandora's box. I might have seen that happen. What I would suggest to you is, rather than thinking about a pilot as this fixed thing, think about a pilot in the same context that you would delivering a piece of software following an incremental or agile approach. You think of it as a journey, and you have to get your stakeholders aligned around the notion of it's a learning experience. We're not doing this believing we know exactly what the future will bring us. We're doing this so that we can experience the future in a controlled scale, on a smaller setting, with an impacted set of users that are resilient and expecting to deal with some disappointment. And you manage your way through that. And if you do that, you can overcome obstacles, and you can come up with a real plan for the real modernization, right? Or when you get to the end of this pilot, you sort of got it right as you scale. And just like that agile project execution, you start small with a couple pieces of scope, and you start broadening it out. So often I see, a rigid scope of work defined for a pilot, and it's this all or nothing thing. And I just kind of scratch my head and I say, I thought you people said that you were following an agile and DevOps mindset, and that you understand this concept. But yeah, it's unfortunately not. So, start soon, start small, scale. That's really how I see success, working out there. Technical considerations, unfortunately and fortunately, right? It's often quite easy to identify technical criteria. Technical people are really good at creating, death by 10,000 check boxes of things that must be true. Does it use this technology? Does it not use that technology? Does it do this? Does it not do that? I say, focus on the big picture things. I'm a big fan of architecture, and design's important, and technology selection is important. If you're headed towards the cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, or Google, both Amazon and Azure provide, I believe they both call it their well-architected framework. I'd say that's a good lens to look at your technology, your architecture from that perspective. You could certainly go deeper, but that's giving you the big things to think about. The other things to think about, because these are going to be drivers of scope and risk, and they're also going to be things that elongate or compress the timelines from when you start to when you are able to onboard stakeholders outside of IT. So what are those things? You're taking data off the mainframe. Do you need to migrate that data as part of this pilot, or do you have some way to be backwards compatible with mainframe data? Can you decouple that migration of data to UTF-8 ASCII until you're committed to the pilot being an enduring thing with a destination and a date to go to production? And think about this. how do you reconcile data with the production system? How do you test? And if you have to change your data as part of your pilot exercise, how do you manage that variability? And the other thing that I've seen quite often is people don't think about this. You move a system off the mainframe into a modern development environment with DevOps policies and tool chains, and it's awesomeness. It's the nirvana that people want to go towards. And what teams are often surprised to discover, and lately it's been CloudFrame sort of explaining this, is that there's a lot of things that never touched the mainframe for reasons that are beyond me. But things like test-driven development and automated regression testing, this is quite prevalent in the Java and .NET communities. And the first big surprise, with customers is, oh, wait a second, I just used a tool to generate all of this new code, and I need 70, 80, 90% JUnit or NUnit test case coverage to meet my DevOps policies to deploy this code. How the hell am I going to do that? So it's just something to think about. If you're taking an automated approach, you need to think about automation to generate those test cases. And then finally, I think the one technical consideration that doesn't really get thought about until the end is you're on a mainframe now. You pretty much have vendor lock-in. There's not another platform you can go. There are no other mainframe providers anymore. It's IBM. There's software lock-in. You have that on every platform. Are you designing a future state? Are you using tools as part of your journey that have vendor lock-in? Are you okay with that? Do you not want vendor lock-in? Do you know how to get out of vendor lock-in? I think it's an important question. There's so many considerations, and this can quickly become a Pandora's box. And this is where it's really, really critical to understand who your stakeholders are, to understand the stage gates you have to go through. Architecture is definitely one of them. It is something that should not be underestimated. I've seen companies easily spend 6 months going through architecture and security architecture reviews. I've also seen companies that can get it done in a week. So there's a pretty big continuum of how companies run in this space. The thing that I would say is probably most important from a consideration perspective when I think about this is that, remember, you're on a journey. If you're a COBOL shop, you have 10, 20, 50, 100 million lines of code. COBOL, JCL, assembler, dial 280, focus, easy, Treve. Who the heck knows what else you're going to find? Remember, I said you're going to find a lot of things you didn't know about. You're going to find a lot of little unicorn technologies that you didn't even know you were running. I think what makes an excellent pilot is when you have a leader behind that pilot who understands what you need to do is you need to come out of this with some outlook, some ability to have a modernization and transformation capability, just like other capabilities that the enterprise that you are part of has internally, right? You have the ability to track employees' time, to pay them, to create software, to run it in production. You have all these abilities. If you have a large mainframe and lots of code, and you're planning to modernize it over 5, 7, 10 years, this is something you are going to need. So so often pilots are just looked at through a microscope of the small system and the operations area that they're impacting. And I run into large enterprises all the time that are, there's 7 different groups that have sort of done modernization differently. So Keep things in perspective. Technology is important, but it's a small part of the equation for folks on this webinar today. It certainly is the center of gravity in your universe. But when you think about this journey, in my experience, the critical success factor is around keeping stakeholders engaged, informed, aligned, committed to the planned outcomes and measures of success, right? That's what makes modernization successful. So case studies, you wouldn't be in a webinar with a tool vendor if we didn't share case studies with you. So we'll talk about one of our customers. This is really cool. So card network, I don't know if that means anything, so I'll explain. The plastic in your wallet with logos, Visa, American Express, MasterCard, Discover, those are card networks. And they are the networks behind e-commerce. And, one of them's our customer. It's pretty cool. They had looked at the competitive landscape. They've tried, working with different tools, and they just couldn't find one they were happy with. What they were looking for was, a solution to being able to support a COBOL system on the mainframe and both on Windows. And that's a capability they have today, and they're looking to move to Java strategically over a 7 to 10 year time frame into a cloud native, cloud neutral Java services environment. And they're looking to take that journey of 1,000 steps. So we were a skunk works, we're a young startup, and they did a project with us. And their definition of success was, help us on the mainframe, help us on Windows. If you could get us 90% of the way there, we will happily do the manual coding for the rest of it ourselves, and we'll consider it a success. What they discovered working with us is that they would finish the project in 1/4 of the time. The code that we generated was exactly what they needed. They did not need to change a single line of code. We produced identical results. We literally black boxed regression testing, pushed the same data through the COBOL system, and the Java code we generated use a binary compare utility to make sure the outputs are the same. Pretty cool. Automated test cases. We generated automated JUnit test cases for automation in their CI/CD pipeline, and they're good test cases. They're durable, and that's a feature of our product. So you could use those test cases as a jump-off point for your test-driven development, or you could just keep regenerating them, using test data. Now, the other thing that was really cool, our code generator is highly customizable by systems integrators, by our customers, or you can ask us to do it. And that cloud native journey they're looking for, we just did some configuration on our code generator. We regenerated their system by replacing QSAM file manipulation with Kafka topics. Brought the system up after configuring, the Spring Boot properties to tell it which topics and endpoints for Kafka. And lo and behold, as files would come into a landing zone, a new piece of code sprayed those records into topics, and the whole system just worked. It was a thing of beauty. So now let's put together two CloudFrame products, CloudFrame Relocate and CloudFrame Renovate. The case study I just shared was CloudFrame Renovate. That's for customers who are making the decision to exit COBOL forever and do a one-time transformation to Java and own that Java code. Well, CloudFrame Relocate is a variant of that. It is a transpiler that integrates in your build system for the purpose of allowing you to run your COBOL workload as Java. And customers that have a commitment to COBOL for some part of the future, because you can't change everything. And let's face it, not everybody is saying that COBOL's broken or mainframes are broken, but everybody we're talking to is saying, if you could help us run our COBOL workloads for less, you have my attention. How can you help me? Well, CloudFrame Relocate lets you run that workload as Java on Z or any cloud, no code or data changes. We're backwards compatible with DB2, vSAM, QSAM. Hell, we can even call load modules, whether we're running on Z or running in the cloud. It's really cool. Now, why would you do this other than a science project? You would do it because running Java on Z is a fraction of the cost of running COBOL because of something called the zip processor. Java is zip eligible. Depending on how your shop charges back costs for zip usage, it might not cost less at all, but your enterprise gets benefits. But with the exception of one customer, everyone that I've spoken to is seeing about an 80 to 90% cost reduction in chargeback for zip versus chargeback for GPP. Suggestion, go to cloudframe.com, go to our blog. There's a good article called The Economics of Java on Z that explains, how CloudFrame Relocate can help you take advantage of the very generous things that IBM is providing to you if you run Java on Z. In terms of CloudFrame Renovate, absolutely eliminate big bang thinking. When I think about my experience with modernization, I've taken systems off the mainframe. I've spent time in my career, 6 years with a company, completely greenfielding their systems and decommissioning their mainframe. What is most important to me, and I think what should be very important to anybody considering this, is don't let a tool vendor control your destiny. Most tools on the market that are taking COBOL to Java are forcing you to ring fence your entire system, convert it to Java, take all your data, convert it to UTF-8 ASCII, solve for scheduler coordination across two platforms, solve for upstream, downstream data integration, which, by the way, includes data conversions from EBCDIC mainframe formats back to those formats. If you're moving online systems off, now you've got to plumb in some middleware to integrate with things that are still on the mainframe. Don't let a tool vendor control your destiny, right? The ability to automate modernization and control the scope and granularity of change, that's what lets you execute with confidence and the least amount of risk. All right, that's what lets stakeholders stay friends and focus on the outcomes and measures of success that they committed to. And that's how you basically deliver value to your organization. Questions, David, do we have any questions?